Hello, I'm Lila. My sister cut ties with me, said my HVAC job might embarrass her fiancé's family. But that wasn't the worst part. She didn't scream. She didn't block me. She just erased me. Quietly. One day, I was the sister who paid her tuition. The next, I wasn't even on the wedding guest list. My name disappeared from the family group chat. My work, credited to someone else. My mother. She said, "Not everyone needs you to show up." They used my hands to build their comfort, then shamed me for showing up with calloused palms. What happens when you realize your family sees you as the blemish on their perfect photo? What do you do? When you've been cut out of your own story, would you fight to stay, or would you finally walk away? I never expected to start my Friday afternoon inside a bridal boutique that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was all soft lights, blush tones, and gold-accented mirrors. The kind of place that whispered luxury with every floral arrangement. I had just finished a last-minute HVAC service call. They were having issues with the thermostat before a weekend of bridal fittings, and I figured I'd drop off the final invoice in person. I walked in wearing my uniform, a navy button-up with my name stitched above the chest, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and my tool bag slung over one shoulder. A few women glanced over, their conversations skipping a beat. One of them, blonde and immaculately dressed in satin blush, gave me a look that hovered between pity and discomfort. "The mop closet's over there, sweetie," she said, gesturing behind the counter with a little wave of her champagne flute. I stood still for a second, unsure if I'd heard her right. "No," I replied, my voice even. "I'm not with maintenance. I installed the climate system here last year, just dropping off paperwork." Her face didn't shift. No apology. Just a stiff smile, like I'd spoken in another language. It didn't last long, 30 seconds maybe, but that was all it took. The boutique felt smaller suddenly, as if the air I'd cooled myself now stifled me. I placed the folder on the desk, nodded to the woman at reception, and stepped back out into the street. The afternoon sun was sharp, low enough to catch the tops of cars and glint off windows. My van sat a few spaces down, logo faded but still legible. I unlocked it, tossed my bag into the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel with the door open, letting the breeze blow through. It wasn't the first time someone had mistaken me for the help, and I doubted it'd be the last, but something about it, how casual she was, how sure, itched under my skin. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, the same way it had for years, dependable as ever. On the drive back to my apartment, I kept the radio low. Some old folk tune played, lyrics about heading home, about being missed. I turned it off before the chorus. Being missed wasn't something I expected anymore. Back home, I parked in the small gravel lot behind the duplex. The familiar creak of my front steps greeted me, and the scent of clean laundry from my neighbor's window drifted over. Inside, I kicked off my boots and stretched my shoulders, feeling the long day settle into my spine. I still had one stop to make. Every year, I brought pie to the family dinner before the holidays. Not store-bought. I always went to the little bakery on Hawthorne, the one Dad used to love. It was muscle memory by now. I drove back out, parked near the red-bricked storefront, and stepped into the warmth of butter and cinnamon. The woman behind the counter recognized me. "Same as usual?" she asked with a smile. I nodded. "Yep, 1 apple, 1 pecan." The boxes were warm in my arms when I stepped outside. I set them in the van and pulled out my phone, dialing Mom. She picked up after a few rings. "Hey, Mom," I said. "Got the pies. Want me there around 5? Silence. Too long. "Mom?" Her voice came soft. Careful. "Lila, I was actually going to call you. About tonight." My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. "Okay." "There's going to be... well, Mason's parents will be there. It's kind of a formal gathering." "And?" She exhaled slowly, like she was dreading the next sentence. "Callista just thought, it might be best if you sat this one out." I stared ahead. The brake lights of the car in front of me glowed red in the fading daylight. "Because of what? My job?" No, don't make it that," she said too quickly. "It's just... image matters. First impressions, you know?" I bit down on the inside of my cheek, felt the heat build behind my eyes. "I see. I'm sure we can do something later this week, just the 3 of us. Maybe brunch?" I didn't answer right away. My voice, when it came, was steady. Got it. And I hung up. No yelling, no tears. Just quiet. Back at my apartment, I placed the pies on the kitchen counter. I didn't bother opening them. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall. The silence of the apartment echoed. I thought about every year I'd brought something. When I couldn't afford pies, I brought rolls. When I couldn't afford rolls, I showed up with candles I made from scratch in mason jars. I'd never missed a Thanksgiving dinner. Not once. Even when Dad passed, I held it together for Mom. For Callista. I used to think that meant something. The room began to dim as evening settled in. I turned on one lamp, then another, bathing the apartment in soft gold. I lit a candle on the table, a habit now more comforting than festive. There had been a time I trudged through snow just to deliver Christmas lights to Mom's house. I remembered brushing off the frost from my eyelashes, arms filled with tangled cords and spare bulbs. Callista had smiled then. She'd called me holiday hero. Maybe she'd meant it. Or maybe she needed me then. A chime pulled me from the memory. A message on my phone. Instagram. From Katie, an old friend from high school. Her text was simple. Your sister looked stunning last night. The dinner was so classy. Below it, a photo. Callista in red, Mason beside her, their arms around Mom. Everyone was dressed in shades of navy and cream, like some pre-planned magazine shoot. The dining table gleamed. Candles, silver, wine glasses. I wasn't there, obviously. But what struck me wasn't the absence. It was the presence of something unexpected. In the far corner of the glass window, reflected just faintly enough to catch, was my van, parked in front of the bakery, the very one I had just left. I zoomed in, heart kicking up. Even when I wasn't invited, even when I didn't belong, I was still there, still holding the structure up. The photo was still open on my screen when I leaned back in the chair, the glow from the display casting soft shadows on the walls around me. The apartment was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old wall clock I hadn't bothered to replace. I hadn't touched the pie. The bakery box sat on the counter, perfectly untouched, its golden string still tied in a bow, just like the ones I'd brought every year. I kept staring at the reflection in the photo, the blur of my HVAC van barely visible in the shop window behind my sister's smile. That tiny, unintended glimpse of me, silent, peripheral, said more than any caption ever could. My hand hovered over the screen before closing the app. I didn't need to look anymore, still holding the structure up. It wasn't just a metaphor. I was the one making sure their rooms were warm in the winter, cool in the summer. I built comfort. I maintained it. And yet, in their world, I was too mechanical to be brought to the table. I grabbed a throw blanket and sat back down on the couch, legs tucked under me. The couch creaked softly under my weight, like it too was tired of carrying things no one appreciated. The notification tone chimed again. This time, a message from a different friend. Clara, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. You need to see what your sister said during the toast, it read. My stomach tensed. I tapped the link. The video buffered for a moment before Callista's voice poured through my phone's speaker, too chipper for the moment I was bracing for. And we're just so grateful to have everyone here, she said, smiling wide. And of course, Mason's parents. You're the gold standard of what family means. Laughter and clinking glasses followed. And we were laughing earlier about what it would have been like if Lila had shown up in her HVAC gear. I mean, bless her heart, but they'd think we live in a garage. A wave of laughter erupted around her. People clapped. Callista sipped her wine like she had just delivered the joke of the night. I replayed that clip twice. No tears, no outburst. I just sat there, letting it echo in my living room like smoke that wouldn't clear. In that moment, something small and heavy cracked open in my chest. Not grief exactly, not even rage, just this dull, cavernous confirmation that I had been right to feel othered, that it wasn't in my head. The next morning passed without much movement from me. I woke up early, as I always did, made coffee, sat by the window and watched the sky brighten, shades of blue creeping past the rooftops like reluctant confessions. By mid-morning, I finally picked up the phone and called her. Mom. She answered on the third ring. Lila? She asked, her voice soft. I watched the toast, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. There was a pause, a long one. You're being sensitive, she said finally. Callista didn't mean anything by it. I didn't ask what she meant, I replied. I asked why you didn't say anything. I was trying to keep things light. It wasn't the time or place for drama. And when is? I asked. When is the time or place for a mother to stand up for her daughter? Sweetheart, you're always reading too much into things. You know how Callista gets. She was just trying to make the evening smooth. Mason's parents are traditional. You keep using that word like it means something. I cut in. What word? Traditional. As if tradition excuses being cruel. Her tone shifted. Defensive. Tight. Why must you always assume the worst about people? About your own family? I don't assume, I said quietly. I see. I watch. And no one's hiding anymore. I hung up before she could respond. The quiet after the call wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. I walked into my small workshop corner where I kept my old notebooks, ledgers, invoices, sketches. Tucked between the pages of a binder from years ago was a folded piece of stationery, faded ink, creased edges, Callista's handwriting. I sat on the floor and read it slowly. Lie. You saved me. I don't even know how to thank you. I was so close to dropping out. You didn't even hesitate. I'll never forget this. I owe you big. Love, Cal. That was during her second year at Columbia. She'd maxed out her student loans. Our mom had just lost a consulting gig. And I had picked up weekend shifts to send her that last payment. I folded the letter back carefully. Maybe she forgot. But I didn't. That afternoon, I drove out to a client's house in Northeast Portland. A furnace tune-up. The homeowner, a retired nurse, offered me tea as I wrapped up. I declined, thanked her politely, and sat in my van for a moment before heading back. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need another reminder of home. That evening, I went for a walk around the block. The crisp air bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It helped me think, helped me untangle the noise in my chest. For so long, I had convinced myself that I was doing the noble thing, staying quiet, showing up, keeping the peace. I told myself that if I was just helpful enough, loyal enough, selfless enough, they'd see me, value me. But people don't value what they think they're entitled to. They just take. Back at home, I made myself a simple dinner. Roasted vegetables, leftover chicken. I ate while scrolling through social media. Not to stalk, but to confirm. The video from the toast had already been reposted by one of Callista's bridesmaids. It had over 3,000 views. The comments were a mix of praise and subtle digs. Callista is such a class act. LOL. I'd die if my sister walked in with a wrench. She's so polished. No wonder Mason fell for her. I closed the app. I didn't need to scroll further. I had seen enough. That night, before bed, I pulled out my work ledger again, not to search for more letters or memories, but to begin collecting every invoice I had ever sent related to Callista. School rent, utility bills, flights, groceries, her laptop, even her textbooks. Not for revenge, but for clarity, for my own damn peace. I set the letter down gently, as if the ink might smudge even after all these years. The edges were worn, the fold lines soft and thinning, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, rounded, with those dramatic loops she used to think looked elegant. She needed me when the loans ran dry, but she needed me invisible now. I sat in the quiet of my living room, staring at the letter in my hands, like it might offer answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. It wasn't the lack of gratitude that hurt the most. I had long given up expecting thank yous or accolades. What stung was the revision, this subtle but complete redrafting of our history where I didn't exist, where I hadn't poured my energy, my money, my very presence into making sure she didn't fall. My phone buzzed against the coffee table. A text. Madison, you okay? She asked first. I replied with a simple, fine. Then another message popped through. You should know, Mason thinks your parents paid for Columbia. He doesn't even know you were involved. I read the sentence twice. 3 times. My stomach flipped slowly, like a washing machine on a slow cycle. No mention of me, not even a hint. I typed, "She told him that." Madison replied almost instantly. She said, "My parents always believed in investing in my future." Then she laughed about how lucky she was. I don't think she ever corrected it. It wasn't just a lie, it was an erasure. I leaned back into the couch, blinking at the ceiling. The lights above flickered slightly. I reminded myself to change the bulb. Not tonight. I thought of the day she first called me in tears. 2 months into her second year at Columbia, financial aid had dried up. Our mother had just taken a pay cut. Callista hadn't told anyone else yet, but she was staring down the barrel of dropping out. She didn't ask me outright. She danced around it, talked about how hard things were, how she wasn't sleeping. I had just landed a huge contract retrofitting an old apartment complex. It meant weeks of climbing through ductwork and making spreadsheets and managing subcontractors. But it paid well. I took a weekend shift and wired her what she needed. The next month, I did it again. And again. Textbooks, rent, groceries. All the while, she posted coffee shop study selfies and tagged them. Stad Law Life. And now, sitting here, I wasn't even a footnote. The following morning, I stepped out early to check the mailbox. I had been doing it half-heartedly for the past few days, wondering if perhaps an invite would arrive late, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with a delicate wax seal. But today, like every day before, there was nothing. Bills, a flyer for gutter cleaning, a local newsletter I never subscribed to. Still, something gnawed at me, so I called the local post office. I told them my name, gave them my address. I asked if anything might have gone missing, or if there had been a delivery attempt. The woman on the other end was polite, sympathetic even. "I actually checked this for someone else yesterday," she said. "You're not on the list. There's no delivery pending to your address from that party." My hand tightened around the phone. Not even a clerical error, just absence. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway for a moment, holding onto the railing of the stairs like I might collapse if I let go. The silence of being excluded was louder than any shout. I got dressed and headed out for a job on the coast, an old Victorian that needed a new heat pump installed. The drive was a couple hours, long enough to think, not long enough to drown anything out. The radio stayed off. Out there, surrounded by tools and metal and the hum of machinery, I could pretend for a few hours that I was just a technician. Not a sister, not a daughter, not the unwanted footnote in someone else's success story. The ocean was visible from the back window of the house. I stood there for a few minutes after finishing the job, gloves still on, hands dusty. That view made me think of another moment, one from years ago. I'd taken a train to visit Callista in New York during her first year at school. I'd brought a bag of groceries and essentials she'd said she couldn't afford, bundled up in layers to brave the early snow. She was late meeting me. I stood outside her dorm for nearly 30 minutes, the wet sleet soaking into my boots. When she finally arrived, she smiled big and said, "You didn't have to do all this, Lai." But I did, because no one else would. And now she told people she'd done it alone. What's worse than being forgotten? Being rewritten out of your own story. I left the house with my gear packed, drove home in the fading light, and walked into my apartment without bothering to turn on the lights. The sky outside had gone that bruised shade of blue that usually brings peace. Tonight, it just made everything inside feel colder. I opened my calendar out of habit, needing something to ground me. That's when I saw it. Callista's wedding planning dinner, November 19th. It was synced from a shared family calendar Mom had set up years ago. I stared at the event title. The venue was listed. I recognized it immediately. 3 years ago, I had done a full HVAC install for that building, a newly renovated space downtown that catered to elevated events. At the time, they didn't have much of a budget, and I'd offered them a discount just to get the exposure. I'd worked weekends to meet the deadline, hauled ductwork through narrow hallways, and climbed through crawl spaces until my knees were sore. I never even charged them for the thermostat upgrade. I wanted them to remember me when business picked up. Now my sister was throwing her wedding prep party there. So, I guess I'm not good enough to be invited, but good enough to keep the air flowing. Not good enough for a seat, but good enough to build the room. That thought kept bouncing around my head as I stood in my garage workshop Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day that normally gave me peace. Today, though, the silence felt like a pressure building from the inside out. I stared at the calendar on the wall, a dry erase board next to my service schedule, and erased the notation. Callista's planning dinner. I'd written it there automatically weeks ago, back when I still thought maybe there'd be a chair with my name on it. I held the eraser still for a moment, then wiped the whole square clean. If they didn't want me in the picture, fine, but they didn't get to erase what I'd built. I turned toward my workbench, opened the drawer where I kept my older reclaimed parts, and started sketching. A custom vent cover, the kind I hadn't made since I gifted one to Dad years ago for his study. This one would be a wedding gift, though God knows they didn't ask for it. Still, it felt right, a gesture I could live with. No fancy wrapping, just brass and steel, etched with words that meant something real. Stay warm. Stay real. I spent the rest of the afternoon shaping the metal, sanding the corners, engraving the faceplate. It gave my hands something to do, which helped keep my thoughts from boiling over. I worked until the sun dipped low and shadows pooled around my feet. Then I boxed the piece and placed it gently in the passenger seat of my van. The venue wasn't far. Downtown, 2 blocks off the main stretch. I'd done the HVAC there myself 3 years earlier, long before it became a trendy spot for rustic chic weddings. Back then, the drywall was still patchy and the contractor was late half the time. But I'd kept to my word, got the airflow balanced and the ductwork sealed, even threw in a free wireless thermostat. I slipped the box into the staff entrance and asked the event manager to deliver it during setup. I didn't linger. I didn't leave a card. 2 days later, I was back in my shop, going over invoices for an upcoming job, when my phone buzzed. Madison again. They're posting pictures already. Thought you should know. I clicked the link. There it was. Callista beaming at her bridal shower, surrounded by sunflowers and champagne glasses. And in the background, mounted right above the dessert table, was my vent cover. But the placard beneath it read, "A heartfelt creation from Mason, her perfect match." I closed the app, didn't scream, didn't throw the phone. I just sat still, staring at the far wall of my workshop. Inside me, something didn't just break. It shifted, like a slow, undeniable slide into place. I'd been used, again, and it had been painted over with smiling captions and trendy hashtags. I didn't call to correct it, didn't leave a comment, but I did pick up my keys. I stopped by the store to grab groceries, bread, eggs, milk, some fruit, and drove out to Mom's place on the west side. Her porch light was already on when I pulled up. It was late afternoon, that in-between time when everything feels faded, like the day is shrugging itself off. She answered the door in her robe and slippers, her hair pulled back the way she always wore it on Sundays. "Lila," she said, surprised. "You didn't say you were coming." "I brought a few things," I said, holding up the bags. "Thought you might need them." She stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled like laundry detergent and lemon-scented cleaner. Everything in its place, like always. We moved through the kitchen in silence for a few minutes. I unpacked the bags while she shuffled around, tidying what was already spotless. Finally, I said it. "Why do you let her rewrite everything?" She didn't turn, just kept folding the same dish towel she'd already folded twice. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," I said, more gently than I felt. "She tells people you and Dad paid for Columbia. She puts my work under Mason's name, and you let her." Mom sighed, then turned to face me. Her mouth opened, then closed. She set the towel down. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I think pretending everything's fine is what's made it harder." "She's getting married," Mom said, as if that explained anything. "She's building a life. She needs things to go right. She needs support." "And what do I need, Mom? Just to keep showing up and fixing the heater when it breaks? To pay for the party and stay out of the photos?" She looked down. "Callista has a future," she said after a moment. You make things. My chest tightened. I made her future, I said quietly. You know that. Silence stretched long between us. Then, almost too soft to hear, she said it. Not everyone needs you to show up. There it was, the line I'd always felt but never heard. I nodded once, set the last apple into the fruit bowl, and walked to the door. I left the receipt in the bag, I said, in case she needs to credit Mason for the groceries too. She didn't stop me. The sun was starting to set by the time I got back to my place. The apartment felt cooler than usual. I left the windows open anyway. I moved slowly through the living room, picking up a framed certificate from the shelf. It was from a community project I'd led 5 years ago, installing affordable heating units for senior homes in Southeast Portland. I'd been proud of that one. Still was. I placed it in a drawer, not out of shame. Just quiet reclamation. Some things didn't need to be on display to hold value. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Archive, Callista Tuition. It was all there. Wire transfers, copies of textbook receipts, rent payments I'd made directly to her landlord, emails, my name in the headers. I wasn't preparing to fight. I was just done being erased. That night, I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. No TV, no music, just the sound of the water heater humming in the background, the very thing I was always called to fix for everyone else. I opened a blank document and typed one line. I was not an afterthought. I was the foundation. I sat with it, then hit save, and kept going. I didn't need revenge. I needed receipts. After shutting down my laptop that night, I didn't sleep much. My mind raced, not with fury, but with focus. Cold, surgical clarity. When people show you what you are to them, again and again, you stop trying to revise the story and start documenting the truth. By the time sunlight crept through the blinds, I was already at the kitchen table with 3 manila folders open and my external drive plugged into my laptop. For every text message asking for help, every email requesting another rent deposit or textbook order, there was a paper trail. I labeled it all. Tuition invoices, Zelle receipts, photos of checks written from my business account. I wasn't doing it to wave around in some messy confrontation. I wasn't building a case for court. I was archiving my value. Quietly, for myself. Mid-morning, I slipped the USB into a small plastic envelope and labeled it in block letters. Truth. Then I set it aside and grabbed my keys. I had a service visit scheduled for a property across town, but I carved out time before that for a stop I'd been avoiding. Callista's wedding venue. I didn't dress differently. Still in uniform, hair tied back, same steel-toed boots that had tread across half the basements in Portland. I pulled into the gravel lot behind the venue just before 11. The place was buzzing with activity, florists unloading boxes, a photographer scouting angles, and a small team of event planners moving with that mix of urgency and practiced ease. I stepped inside through the side entrance I'd installed a new fire-rated door for, and the cool rush of perfectly balanced air met me. I'd gotten the airflow right in this building. It had taken extra time, some out-of-pocket expense for better diffusers, but I'd done it right. A young guy in a headset stopped me halfway down the hallway. "Staff entrance is around back," he said. "I'm not staff," I replied. "Just checking something. I did the HVAC system here years ago." His expression changed, less authoritative, more awkward. "Oh, sorry, okay." I walked toward the main utility panel, and that's when I noticed it. My plaque, the small brass one I'd mounted next to the thermostat unit, was gone. In its place, a brushed metal plate reading, "Design Integration by West Edge Interiors." I stood there, heart sinking, not out of surprise, but out of that slow, settled confirmation that you're not being paranoid. They really do want to take everything and leave you with nothing. West Edge. I remembered them. They were the subcontractor that briefly consulted on finishes. They never touched the wiring or the ductwork. But now, they were getting full credit. I snapped a photo with my phone, not for the public, for the file. Then I left, back through the door I'd installed, past the people prepping the space for a party I wouldn't be part of. I drove straight to my shop, parked in the rear lot, and sat in the cab for a moment before heading inside. The familiar smell of metal, motor oil, and the faint citrus of my hand cleaner welcomed me. I'd barely put my bag down when my phone buzzed. Madison, again. Did you know Callista's firm is using your install photos on their site? I froze, then typed back. What? She sent a link. It took a few seconds to load. But when it did, there it was. Callista's firm's homepage with a carousel of images. A sleek, minimalist home with a perfectly centered HVAC control panel, ductless mini-splits positioned flawlessly in a modern loft, and a caption beneath it all. Seamless solutions, curated for every lifestyle. I knew those spaces. I'd sweated through every one of those installs, bent copper in 100-degree attics, crawled through crawl spaces no one else would touch. Not only were the photos mine, but they had been filtered, lightened, and re-tagged to highlight the firm's design-forward approach. The last slide included a tag, #Callista Designs, #Woman, in Law, and Style. Not function, not labor, not sweat, just aesthetics. There was no mention of me, of Airstream Solutions, of the woman who did the work behind the wall. Something inside me snapped into place. Not like a break, but like a switch finally flipping. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I opened my laptop again. This time, I crafted 2 emails. The first was addressed to the venue. Subject line, Intellectual Property Licensing Inquiry. It was formal, factual, not aggressive. Just a direct outline of my original contract, a copy of the permit numbers, and a query about why a different firm was now credited on public signage. The second email was a cease and desist notice to Callista's firm. I cited image use without proper credit, noted professional misrepresentation, and included screenshots with timestamps and my original project files. I didn't CC Callista. I didn't even sign my name with emotion. Just Lila Callahan, Owner-Technician Airstream Solutions, LLC. I moved both messages to scheduled drafts. I wasn't ready to send them. Not yet. But they were ready. Just like I was. And then, without thinking too much about it, I opened a new message. This one wasn't professional, it was personal. To Helen Montgomery. Subject, some truths about the wedding preparations. I didn't write much, just attached a single PDF labeled Behind the Dress. Inside were invoices, the plaque photo, a screenshot of Callista's firm's misuse, and a short note. I thought you might want to know where the air your guests will breathe came from, and who put it there. Then I hit send. What they call sabotage, I call disclosure. That's what I told myself as I hit send. The cursor blinked for half a second before the email disappeared from the outbox, the quiet ping confirming it had gone straight to Helen Montgomery, Mason's mother. I leaned back in the chair. My hands didn't tremble. My chest didn't pound. There was no dramatic swell of justice, just the soft settling of truth finding its way to the right place. Afterward, I made tea and went about the rest of my evening as if I hadn't just lobbed a silent grenade into the heart of Callista's curated life. I folded laundry, reorganized the drawer where I kept spare furnace filters. The tea went cold by the time I finished, but I didn't mind. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Calm. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as usual. I didn't check my phone right away. I made coffee, fed the neighbor's cat who'd taken to sunning himself on my porch, and prepped a small toolbox for the day's appointment. It was only when I sat down to lace up my boots that I saw the missed call. Helen Montgomery. No voicemail. Just a call placed around 6:42 a.m. My stomach tightened, but I didn't dial back right away. I wanted her to reach out because she had something to say, not because I begged for acknowledgement. That had been my pattern for years. Show up, stay quiet, make it easy. Not anymore. An hour later, just as I was locking up to head out, the phone rang again. I picked up on the second ring. Ms. Callahan? Her voice was composed, steady. This is Helen. Yes, I said, keeping my tone even. I received your email. Pause. I read everything. Twice. I waited. I won't lie, she continued. It was a lot to take in. I had no idea. No reason you would, I said. That's kind of the point. She inhaled through her nose, sharp but controlled. The kind of breath you take when you're absorbing disappointment you didn't expect. I appreciate your honesty, she said. And the way you presented it, no drama, just the facts. That was the goal. There was another pause, then, you've done more for Callista's future than we ever could. That means something. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the scales tip ever so slightly back toward balance. We didn't speak long. She ended the call by saying she needed time to process. I thanked her for listening, hung up, and slid my phone into my pocket without checking messages. Later that evening, after returning from my service call, I dropped my bag at the door and collapsed onto the couch. My feet ached, and my back protested every time I shifted. I reached for my phone, intending to scroll mindlessly for a bit. That's when it happened. A notification popped up at the top of my screen. Family group chat. One new message. I hadn't seen anything from that thread in weeks. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity has a way of pulling at old scars. The message was from my mother, except it wasn't meant for me. Let's pray Lila doesn't show up and ruin the aesthetic. You know how she gets. No punctuation. Just flat, careless words tossed into what she thought was a private thread between her and Callista. Except she'd sent it to the full extended family chat. A silence followed that felt louder than anything I'd ever heard in that group. No one jumped in to defend her. Just a series of ellipses, then a few quiet reactions. A thumbs down, an eye roll. Madison replied with a simple, "Wow." I stared at the screen, blinking. It wasn't that I didn't know how she really felt. I'd felt it for years, in the way she looked past me in photos, in the invitations that never came, in the thank you notes addressed to my amazing daughter that never had my name on them. But seeing it laid out, publicly, like I was a stain she hoped wouldn't show up in the wedding pictures, that did something different. It snapped the last thread of pretending we were just complicated. No, they were cruel. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Madison. "Hey," she said, skipping the greeting. "You saw it?" "Yeah, that was ice cold and public." She meant it. "I know." There was a pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. I hung up soon after, sat back, let the silence settle around me. No tears, no outrage, just this heavy, grounding clarity. They weren't afraid I'd embarrass them. They were afraid of what I reminded them of, who they weren't, that I did real work, that I didn't need filters or curated captions, that my presence forced them to look at their performance of perfection and realize how much of it was built on omission, and they hated that I wouldn't play along. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet blur. I microwaved leftovers, organized receipts, refilled my toolbox, did everything I always did. But this time, with no part of me waiting for someone to notice, that part had died somewhere between Helen's call and my mother's message. Just before bed, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text. From Mason. "I think we need to talk, just you and me." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. "When?" He replied. "Tomorrow. Same coffee shop near your shop? Noon?" I didn't answer right away, but I knew I would go. Truth always looks like sabotage to liars. Saturday crept in with a stillness that didn't match what I knew was coming. I sat at my kitchen table that morning, the air heavy with the scent of strong coffee and something sharper, anticipation. The message from Mason still lingered on my phone, unopened since the night before. I hadn't responded, not because I was avoiding it, but because I didn't need his permission to act. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't after chaos. I wanted truth to land where it needed to, and for once, I wasn't going to stand in its way. Before heading out for the day, I printed one last folder of documentation. Backups, timelines, proof of payment. I slid the pages into a clear binder, labeled it plainly, "In case of lies." Then I set it beside my purse on the entryway table. If anything went sideways, I'd have facts. Around noon, Madison called. Her voice was low, tight with urgency. "It happened," she said. "What?" "The rehearsal dinner. Mason stood up in front of everyone, family, friends, even their pastor, and said there were irreconcilable truths. That's the phrase he used. I didn't speak. He canceled it, right there, lie, no yelling, no accusations, just ended it." I closed my eyes for a second, not in celebration, not in relief, just a moment to process what had been undone. "Callista?" I asked. She froze, like she didn't see it coming. She was in full makeup, next to the centerpiece you made for that venue. Didn't even blink for a while. Then she walked out, alone. I thanked Madison, then ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. It wasn't about winning. It was about finally being free of pretending I was okay with being erased. That night, the quiet buzz of my inbox pulled me back to my laptop. I wasn't expecting anything major, but something told me to search my email archives one more time. I filtered by sender. Grandfather's estate attorney. It didn't take long to find, a thread from almost 6 years ago. The original will had listed both Callista and me as equal inheritors of the old family cabin property up near Mount Hood. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant something. Dad had proposed to Mom there. We'd spent summers fixing leaky pipes and painting shutters. But attached to a later email, from 2 years ago, just months before Callista's firm opened, I found a revised copy. This one had only her name. In the digital signature log, 2 names appeared beneath the approval fields. Callista, Vera, no note, no explanation, just gone. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the familiar ache of being quietly removed from what was mine. The cabin hadn't come up in years. I assumed Mom had sold it, or maybe it had been tied up in taxes, but no, it had simply been reassigned. I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking at the edge of a document that told me, again, exactly where I stood in their world. The call came around 8:30 p.m. "Lila?" Mom's voice cracked immediately. "It's all falling apart." I stayed silent. "Your sister is devastated," she continued. "Everyone's talking. Mason's parents are pulling out of the engagement. She's not answering anyone's calls. What did you do?" I swallowed the heat building in my throat. "I gave him the truth, that's all." "You didn't have to go that far," she said sharply. "You could have talked to me. You didn't have to humiliate her like this." I almost laughed. "Humiliate her?" I repeated. "Mom, do you remember when you said I shouldn't come to Thanksgiving because of how I'd look in front of Mason's parents? Or when you said not everyone needs me to show up? That's not what I meant, but it's what you said." There was a pause, then softer. "She's your sister." "And I was hers," I replied. "When I paid her tuition, when I stayed quiet through every insult, when I made her wedding gift by hand, only to watch it get credited to her fiancé." More silence. "You erased me," I said simply. "From the guest list, from the photos, from the will." I could hear her breath catch. "I didn't—" "Don't lie to me," I cut in. "I found the file. I saw your name under the signature." The pause on the other end was long. I imagined her standing in the same kitchen where she once taught me to bake bread from scratch, her hands now shaking, lips tight with shame she wouldn't admit. Finally, all she said was, "You don't understand how things had to be." I felt something inside me fall away. "You taught me one thing well, Mom," I said. "How to disappear." Then I hung up. I opened my phone, went into the family group chat, and without hesitation, tapped "Leave conversation." No dramatic goodbye, no explanations, just gone. Because sometimes disappearing is the loudest protest. But this time, I disappeared on my own terms. When I woke up Sunday morning, the air in the apartment felt still, like it was holding its breath. Outside, the fall sunlight streamed through the blinds in quiet slats, but there was no warmth in it. I sat up slowly, legs hanging off the edge of the bed, and checked my phone. Messages. Dozens of them. Some were from extended family members, distant cousins I hadn't spoken to since Dad's funeral. Others were old coworkers, a couple of former clients, and even someone I barely remembered from high school. They weren't all dramatic. Some just said, "Saw what happened. Proud of you." Others were quieter. "Didn't know. Sorry you went through that." I didn't reply to most. I didn't feel the need to explain or gloat or apologize. I felt grounded, solid. Callista's wedding was supposed to be the crowning moment of our family's image. Vera's long game to finally be accepted into the kind of social circles she always fantasized about. Instead, it became the headline of a local news outlet's Sunday feature. Rising young attorney's engagement canceled amid allegations of financial misrepresentation. The article was short, professional, but biting. No names were explicitly dropped, but it didn't take much for anyone in our circle to connect the dots. The reporter had clearly done some digging, citing conflicting reports regarding who financed the bride-to-be's Ivy League education, and questions about branding overlaps between her firm and a local HVAC business. My business. And for once, no one could deny it. By mid-afternoon, the firm Callista worked at posted a brief, sterile message on their website. "We have paused all partnership consideration involving Miss Callista Callahan, pending internal review." I didn't share the article, didn't retweet, didn't comment. I didn't need to. Because the one thing I had always known deep down was that truth has a way of peeling through varnish. No matter how polished the surface, it cracks. And this one had cracked wide open. Around 5 that evening, my phone rang again. I knew the number. I debated not answering. But something in me was ready. "Hi, Mom," I said, voice calm. There was a pause. Then, "Lila, she's not okay." I said nothing. "She hasn't left her apartment. She's not eating. Mason won't take her calls. The firm is under pressure. You need to talk to her. You can fix this." I closed my eyes, holding the phone loosely. "She listened to you once," Vera continued, almost desperate. "You're the only one she's ever actually listened to." "No," I said softly. "She didn't listen. She needed something. And I gave it. That's not the same as listening." Vera's voice cracked. "You've changed." "No," I replied, sharper now. "I stopped asking to be loved by people who only know how to use me." There was silence. The kind of silence you only get when someone's been slapped by their own reflection. "Your sister has nothing left," she whispered. "She still has her name," I said. "She still has a chance to make something honest out of it. That's more than I had." "You've always had us." "No, Mom," I said. "I had responsibility. I had obligations. But love? That's never been unconditional in this family. Not when it came to me." She didn't argue, didn't deny it. She just hung there, in the dead space between her breath and mine. "I hope," I added, my voice steady, "that someday you'll understand what it cost me to stay silent all those years. And what it gave me to finally speak." We ended the call quietly. No resolution, no apology, just the severing of a rope that had long since frayed. Later that night, I opened my laptop, not to watch the fallout, not to follow gossip, but to reclaim the one thing I had always had control over, my own narrative. I wrote a post, short, measured, unapologetic. Some stories rewrite themselves, mine won't. I stand by my work, and my silence. I posted it to my business page. Within an hour, the comments came in, clients thanking me for what I'd built for their homes. A woman I hadn't spoken to since trade school, an old teacher who used to buy my brownies at the PTA bake sales. They remembered me, not because I was flashy, not because I was dramatic, but because I had shown up, done the work, and never asked for a spotlight. That night, I lit a single candle and placed it on the windowsill. The flame flickered gently against the dark glass. I wasn't mourning, I was clearing space. I sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad and scribbled a sentence at the top. "You didn't burn the house, you rebuilt your own." I underlined it twice. Then I began planning. Not revenge, not a comeback tour, something quieter, deeper. And tomorrow, I start wiring heat into someone else's future. The warmth I give now, I choose where it goes. The words stayed with me as I locked the door to my apartment and stepped into the early January chill. A light snow had fallen overnight, layering the sidewalks and rooftops in soft powder. The kind of snow that muted the world, not in sadness, but in stillness. I walked slowly toward the community center 2 blocks away, hands tucked into my coat pockets, the hum of a new morning buzzing beneath my skin. 2 months had passed since the wedding that never was. Since the cancellation, the fallout, and the silence that followed. This wasn't the kind of silence that had once hurt me, the kind that came from being excluded or erased. This silence was mine. Chosen. Crafted. A container I built for peace. The double doors of the center stood bright blue against the gray street, a fresh coat of paint added just last week. My name wasn't on any plaque. No spotlight, just one of many people who made this place breathe. Inside, the space smelled like sawdust, warm wiring, and fresh coffee. I walked past the new ductless units I had installed over the holidays, smiled at the heating register humming steadily, and headed straight to the workshop room, where folding chairs had already been arranged in neat rows. On the table at the front sat a small envelope, slightly curled at the edges, my name written across the front in delicate cursive. Evelyn. My grandmother. I stared at the letter for a moment before picking it up and easing into the seat beside it. She'd passed the year before, quietly, as she'd lived, but I knew this wasn't something she'd have left behind without intention. I unfolded the letter slowly, careful not to tear the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant and steady, the kind of script taught in another era. Dear Lila, some families bury their gold, others polish it in silence. You were always both. You may not be invited to every table, but your hands built more rooms than most ever enter. Keep building. I see you. Love, Grandma E. My throat tightened as I read the final line again. I see you. Of all the things I'd ever wanted to hear from family, those 3 words meant the most. I folded the letter and tucked it inside my wallet. It didn't belong on a shelf or a frame. It belonged with me. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the door opened and the women began to arrive, one by one, some older, some younger. One had a baby on her hip, another walked in wearing a faded sweatshirt with a plumber's logo across the chest. They were teachers, mothers, caretakers, job seekers, women who'd been told they didn't belong in trades, who'd been laughed at or dismissed or overlooked. I stood up and smiled. Welcome, I said. I'm Lila. They nodded politely, some smiling shyly, others looking unsure. We're not here to talk about vents and filters, at least not right away. Today, we're starting with something else. They waited. We're starting with the thing no one teaches you in tech school, how not to disappear. A few of them chuckled. The tension eased. I pointed toward the back table where toolkits were stacked. By the time we're done with this course, you'll know how to install a furnace, calibrate a thermostat, and wire a mini split. But more than that, you'll remember you belong here, just like anyone else who ever walked into a house with a wrench. And just like that, the air shifted. Not because I was brilliant, but because I was honest. This room wouldn't have family portraits or wedding photos on the wall, but it would have calloused hands and loud laughter and quiet pride. A new kind of family. Built, not born. After class, I stayed behind to clean up. The woman with the baby lingered. I didn't think I'd be able to follow, she said. But you explain things like someone who's had to figure it out alone. I smiled. I have. She nodded once, hugged her child closer, and walked out into the snow. Back at home that evening, I opened the closet and pulled down the old family photo album. The one with pages that stuck together slightly and edges worn soft from years of fingers flipping through. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it to a photo of the 3 of us, me, Callista, and Mom, taken in the backyard when we were kids. I was probably 8. Callista had a birthday crown on, and I was holding a garden hose. For a long time, I just stared. Then I closed the album, placed it in a plastic container, and labeled it with a Sharpie. Was Not is. I didn't throw it away. Some history you don't erase. You just stop trying to rewrite. That night, I stood by the window with a cup of tea and looked out at the neighborhood. The light from other homes blinked softly, people watching TV, cooking dinner, putting kids to bed. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I felt whole, not fixed, not healed, but whole. I didn't need them to say sorry, I said aloud to no one. I needed to stop apologizing for being me. And I had. I may not have a seat at their table, but I built mine, and it's open to anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Sometimes the people who benefit the most from your silence will call you cruel the moment you speak. Lila's story reminds us that setting boundaries isn't betrayal, it's survival. And choosing peace doesn't mean weakness, it means knowing when enough is enough. Have you ever been erased by the people you loved most? Tell us in the comments, we want to hear your story. And if you felt this one hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories just like this.